Chapter 261. The Innermost Room. When he was out of the room, Klein carefully held his cane and lantern in the same hand, leaving his left hand free so that he could retrieve the contents of his pocket as quickly as possible in the event there was a sudden turn of events. Inside, there were charms, Azic's copper whistle, some tarot cards, and apart from the remaining Resego's characteristic, the all-black eye, his pocket contained all the means available to him. Klein and Miss Bodyguard had barely taken a step to the side when the light of the lantern illuminated the emblem on the door next to them. It was a simple drawing of a baby surrounded by the symbols of wheat, flowers, and spring water. The sacred emblem of Earth Mother. Klein said in a solemn voice. As a former Nighthawk, one of his basic skills was being able to distinguish the symbols of other churches. Miss Bodyguard nodded slightly, as though to confirm this. Her black Gothic regal dress looked even eerier and terrifying in such an environment and atmosphere. Her pale face looked like a grieving wraith under the illumination of the lantern. If any other adventurer were to come here and see this scene, they would definitely flee while stumbling out of fear. Holding his breath, Klein reached out with his left hand, pushed open the stone door, and raised the lantern high. He found that the layout here was very similar to the one before, like a perfect fusion between a small prayer room and a giant statue. Across the empty wheat-colored stone tiles, Klein illuminated the 3 steps ahead of him with a lantern. On the platform was a white stone sculpture about 4 or 5 meters tall. It was a plump and beautiful lady, with ears of wheat growing from her feet, and she was surrounded by spring water. Her dress seemed to flutter, and embedded in it, there were different herbs and flowers, as well as the depiction of different animals. The lady's chest was raised high, and in her arms was an adorable infant in swaddling clothes. She stood there, tall and sacred. "Don't tell me that this is the statue of Earth Mother," Klein said softly with his lips curled. Miss Bodyguard didn't confirm or deny it. After checking their surroundings, the duo left the room and opened the 3rd door nearby. Behind this door was a corridor that allowed 4 people to walk alongside each other. Ahead of them, it was dark and deep, filled with mystery and oddities. It was unknown where it led to. "Let's first confirm the situation behind the 4 doors on the right," Klein suggested. He didn't dare to rashly enter. Using her actions as an answer, Miss Bodyguard floated backward. The duo opened the 4 stone doors on the right, in succession. They separately saw the storm sacred emblem, which was made up of the symbol of gales and stormy waves. The sacred emblem of the sun, which was surrounded by lines. The sacred emblems of the god of combat, which was made from the combination of the symbol for dusk and a sword-shaped symbol. As well as the sacred emblem of knowledge and wisdom, which was represented by an open book and an omniscient eye. In contrast, there were 4 suspected statues of deities in the room. A dignified middle-aged man in black armor, standing over churning waves, surrounded by stormy winds, with lightning flashing behind him and a trident in his hand. There was a young man in a pure white robe, holding a book of deeds in one hand and a golden sphere which resembled the sun in the other. He was handsome and spirited. There was a warrior sitting on a throne high above, holding a sword in front of him. His face was hidden behind his helmet's visor, his entire body covered with an indescribable sense of decay. There was a hooded elder holding a book and the omniscient eye, with only his mouth, wrinkles, and long white beard exposed. Apart from the god of steam and machinery, there were 6 humanoid statues of the Orthodox gods in this strange hall. Considering the weak position of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery before the appearance of Roselle, there seemed to be some sort of explanation regarding this problem. "This is really strange," Klein exclaimed with a sigh, partially because he couldn't stop it, and partially because he was testing Miss Bodyguard's reaction. This grand hall, which was 100 meters deep, actually had 6 of the Orthodox gods collected within it. This was something unimaginable in the current era. How could the Church of the 6 true gods allow their gods to live in the same structure as the other gods? This was a custom that only existed during the 4th epoch. Also, what's with those humanoid statues? Although they looked normal, Unlike the sinister primordial demoness and the true creator statues, they still give off weird vibes. Just what had happened to make the images of the six gods evolve into abstract symbols in this day of age? No, perhaps it's been like this all this time, but the master of this place, a noble who's suspected to be a member of the Tudor family, purposely created statues of the six deities for some purpose. I thought of an item from a novel from my previous life, the Six-Soul Banner. While he waited for Miss Bodyguard's reply, Klein's mind wandered. Miss Bodyguard didn't answer his query and instead said blandly, "There's another door." That's right. Klein suddenly felt fear. In his opinion, doors placed in the center often had a special meaning, perhaps the core of this ancient building. Of course, this also meant that the situation was most likely the most dangerous. "What are your thoughts on that area?" Klein hesitated for 2 seconds and directly asked. Under the situation of not being able to use the gray fog to eliminate any interference, he felt that Miss Bodyguard's spiritual perception and spiritual instincts were more reliable than his divination means at present. After all, she was in a very special state, close to that of a spiritual body, allowing her to communicate with the spirit world without any obstruction to gain revelations. Miss Bodyguard closed her eyes and replied a few seconds later, "Very dangerous, but the danger is subdued. Once you venture deeper, don't touch anything." Subdued danger. Is this equivalent to having something sealed inside? As Klein guessed, he and Miss Bodyguard walked to the central stone door and stepped onto the dark floor. The light of the lantern seemed to dim a little as though it found it difficult to drive out the darkness ahead. Klein had his left hand in his pocket, holding Isaac's copper whistle and a few charms. After about 30 steps, Miss Bodyguard suddenly stopped. Klein raised the lantern in his right hand and saw that the road ahead was blocked by boulders and dirt. On the left and right were 2 stone doors in the same shape as the ones in the main hall. The right side was ajar and filled with mud and stone. Perhaps this ancient structure was above ground back then, but for some reason it eventually sank and collapsed, Klein mumbled. "There's only one direction we can choose from." Before he could finish his words, he saw Miss Bodyguard float ahead, stick to the huge rock, fuse into it, and disappear. Klein's mouth twitched, and he began to patiently wait. After a few minutes, Miss Bodyguard came out from the mud on the right, her body completely free of dust. "It's completely collapsed," she concluded flatly. For a moment, Klein was speechless and could only smile. Following that, the two of them simultaneously looked to the left where the ajar stone door was. There was a tiny crack. Klein went closer and carefully looked through the 3-centimeter gap. His spirit vision, which had originally been blocked by the stone door, immediately discovered something. There were at least 4 bright and powerful spiritual lights inside, 2 that were close to dark gold in color, and 2 that were dark blue like the sea. After using his spirit vision, a narrow scene appeared in Klein's normal vision. The firelight that entered the room illuminated the black stone tiles. On top of the tiles were piles of bones covered with rotten clothing, and a few of them emitted dark gold and dark blue light. Condensed Beyonder characteristics? Mystical items. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein swept his gaze to the ends of the room. Along the dark wall stood a double door. A bloody pair of double doors. There seemed to remnants of fresh blood on the door. They continued sliding down as they reflected the light. Klein had wanted to let Miss Bodyguard scout the way ahead when he suddenly felt a change in Isaac's copper whistle that he was holding in his hand. The originally cold and mild whistle suddenly became bone-piercing. It was a profound feeling of death, this. Klein narrowed his eyes and instinctively took a step back. Then, he noticed that his right forearm was numb and itchy, and that it was beginning to swell. A scene flashed through his mind as he immediately took out a tarot card with his left hand and slashed across his arm. What surged out from his wound wasn't blood, but tiny black squirming worms. Sizzle, when these worms fell to the ground, they eroded into smoke. They struggled and huddled, but in the end, they melted under the glow of the lanterns. After a few seconds, all the black worms in Klein's wound finally flowed out, leaving only crimson liquid. He wriggled his muscles to control the small wound and prevented the blood from flowing further. Miss Bodyguard watched this scene quietly, her pretty eyebrows creasing into a rarely seen frown. Klein was just about to speak when he discovered the coldness and deadliness of Isaac's copper whistle hadn't abated. At the same time, his gaze landed on Miss Bodyguard's shadow. "She never had a shadow to begin with. Run!" Klein shouted and immediately ran towards the hall. Miss Bodyguard quickly floated up, and the two of them saw the lantern light in front of them gradually being swallowed up by a black shadow. Tap, tap, tap. Klein ran like a hurricane as fast as he could while the light around him faded away. Tap, tap, tap. The shadow grew bigger and bigger, closer and closer, thicker and thicker. The light from the flame was about to be completely engulfed, and at that moment the door was still a few meters away. At that moment, Klein instinctively rushed forward and then rolled across the stone door. The light from the fire suddenly brightened, and the uneasiness in his heart instantly disappeared. Isaac's copper whistle also returned to its mild and cold state. Miss Bodyguard floated beside him as she turned around and looked at the passageway which had once again sunk into darkness. She said with an uncertain tone, "Evil spirit, evil spirit." Klein almost drew a deep breath when he heard that. Fortunately, as a clown, he was good at controlling his expression and reactions. In the field of mysticism, evil spirits were extremely terrifying monsters. The best of them could even be said to be on the same level as high-sequence beyonders. An evil spirit is wandering within this ancient structure. For some reason, it's bound or imprisoned within that room. If it was an evil spirit, that explains why Mr. Isaac's copper whistle responded. An evil spirit can be considered as an undead creature. Klein stood up and also looked at the path, which was now submerged in darkness. He felt as if there was a pair of cold eyes staring at him. Chapter 262, Dream. In the cold and gloomy hall, Klein suddenly shivered. He retracted his gaze and said to Miss Bodyguard, "Let's return." From the way Isaac's copper whistle reacted, it's likely that the room contains a terrifying evil spirit. Its danger level is highly likely to be above that of Mariontist Resego and Vice Admiral Hurricane Calango's. It's been roaming these confines for centuries to thousands of years. Perhaps it's already equivalent to a high-sequence beyonder. If it wasn't for its experiencing difficulties in letting its powers escape the room, I would already be dead. Even if Miss Bodyguard is a powerful Sequence 5, there's no hope of us turning the tides of battle with our powers combined. One needs to be aware of one's strength. I cannot be enticed by the suspected beyonder characteristics and mystical items left in there. Greed often leads to death. Klein silently came up with a reason to convince himself. Miss Bodyguard turned her head to look at him. Without much emotion in her eyes, she asked, "What happens next?" "Next?" Klein silently gritted his teeth and said with deliberation, "Let Millet Carter get the police. Who knows when this evil spirit will escape? It's best to finish it as soon as possible." "No, that won't work, Mr. Carter doesn't know enough. By informing the police this way, the police department won't pay enough attention to it. The first batch of people who come to explore this place will suffer heavy casualties, and they might even indirectly help the evil spirit escape from its restraints. Also, for me to see these statues, a detective like me might be silenced. Did you see the bones and spiritual light in the room?" Miss Bodyguard once again cast her gaze towards the dark path behind the ajar stone door and very slightly nodded her head. Klein thought quickly and said, "My guess is that these are the corpses of the explorers from before. They were killed by the evil spirit in that room, and one of the beyonders left behind some mystical items. This might have had something to do with the Viscount family that lived beyond this premises. I plan to inquire about their last names, go to the library, and look for information about their descendants. Perhaps I might gain some valuable clues. After coming to a preliminary confirmation of the situation, I'll make a choice based on the severity of the situation. I might get some explosives, destroy the door, or send an anonymous letter to the police, detailing the existence of the evil spirit. However, I'll have to think of a way to avoid the risk ahead of time. This isn't too urgent. I can take my time." Miss Bodyguard quietly listened to what Klein had to say. Looking ahead, she said in an ethereal voice, "Are you not considering to get people to exorcise this evil spirit? Even if there were no mystical items left behind, the remains after the evil spirit dissipates are still precious enough." "It's the first time I've seen you talk so much." "Probably." Klein replied without hesitation, "The risk is too high. I think my life and health are more important." He organized his words and added, "The most powerful person I know is you. And from your performance just now, you don't seem to be a match for that evil spirit. I can't imagine any other way of finishing it, other than calling the police." Miss Bodyguard turned around, her pale face somewhat translucent. "You still have some sense," she commented calmly, then drifted toward the exit of the ancient hall. "Other than being suspected to be under the true creator's influence, in what way do I look like a madman?" Klein silently lampooned. He held the lantern and cane and followed behind Miss Bodyguard. Throughout the entire process, he felt as if he was being watched by the cold eyes of the dark corridor. It was only when they walked out of the stone door that suffused an ancient aura did the feeling suddenly disappear. Klein turned around and closed the door, sealing the inverted candlesticks, scuffed marks, and the creepy statues of the 6 deities, allowing them to continue their 1,000-year-long slumber in that unchanging darkness and silence. Patting the dust off his clothes, he switched the lantern in his other hand and hurried back to Millet Carter's basement. As for Miss Bodyguard, she had disappeared into thin air as usual. Millet Carter was pacing about in the basement. When he saw Klein exit, he hurriedly asked, "How is it? What's the situation inside?" Klein had long thought of an excuse as he said with an expression of fear, "Terrible. There are a lot of snakes in there, and many spots have collapsed. I plan to gather some information, gather some manpower, and once preparations are done, do another round of exploration. During this period of time, it's best that you don't send anyone in. Believe me, there are more venomous snakes in there than you can imagine." Millet drew a gasp and asked in fear, "Will they slither out? Do you know any experts that can deal with the snakes?" Klein immediately nodded. "I'll get people to help and try my best to deal with this matter. It's the cold autumn now, and the snakes aren't willing to move. As long as you don't send anyone to disturb them, nothing will happen." "Okay, please hurry. I'll close this door and prevent anyone from entering." Hearing that, Millet relaxed a little. When Klein saw that his employer was truly intimidated by what he said, he quickly put down the lantern, nudged his gold-rimmed spectacles, and said, "Next up, I'll gather some information. I'll first gain a preliminary understanding of the layout of the underground structure before I explore it again. That requires you to tell me which Viscount was the original owner of this house." Millet had bought this building precisely because it was an estate of a former noble, so he answered immediately, "Viscount Pound." "What do you know about him and his family?" Klein asked in a professional manner. Millet pondered and said, "Not much. I only know that he won his aristocratic title in the Battle of the Violated Oath. It once enjoyed an illustrious period, but decades later, suddenly declined due to unknown reasons. The family kept losing its heirs, causing it to eventually have to seek out distant relatives to keep the aristocratic title. And the new Viscount Pound is, heh. He squandered most of the family's fortune, and he was demoted to baronet by the king. He's probably still in Backlund and can go bankrupt at any moment. Battle of the Violated Oath. The Battle of the Violated Oath that began in 738 during the Fifth Epoch. Having successfully graduated as a history student, Klein instinctively recalled the corresponding knowledge. The war that happened about 6 centuries ago was a war involving religion. The southern Fainapotter kingdom originally believed in both Earth Mother and the god of knowledge and wisdom. But due to some influencing factors, the two churches began to be at odds with each other, and their believers often clashed. During that period, its two neighbors in the north, the Lone Kingdom and the Ainz Kingdom, seized the opportunity to start a war in the name of protecting freedom of religion. In the later stages of the war, the Faesac Empire joined the fray and attempted to destroy the ploy by Lone and Ainz. However, they still failed to turn the situation around. The result of the war was that the border between Loon and Feyenopater, as well as Intis and Feyenopater, countries such as Lemberg, Massin, and Segur, gained independence. They mainly believed in the god of knowledge and wisdom, leaving the Church of Earth Mother as the only religion in the Feyenopater kingdom. The conflict that lasted 5 years was called the Battle of the Violated Oath, because both sides of the war accused their adversaries of violating the holy oath at the end of the Fourth Epoch. After that, there was more than 300 years of peace in the northern continent. This didn't mean that there was no conflict between nations, but rather there were no wars on that scale again. It lasted until Roselle invented the steam engine and improved the sailboats and artillery. This is the information recorded in the history textbooks. Thinking about it now, since it involved faith, there must have been some Beyonders from the church involved. There must have been an intense Beyonder war. However, it said that that era was a period with few Beyonders. Squadron battles. Could the Pound family's sudden waning and continuous loss of heirs, which happened decades ago, have something to do with the discovery of the ancient structure underground? Klein thoughtfully asked, "Do you know where Baronet Pound currently lives?" "I'm sorry, I don't know." Millet shook his head slightly. Klein asked a few more questions, but seeing that he couldn't get any more information, he bade farewell and returned to 15 Minsk Street. It was almost 5 in the afternoon, and the sky was as dark as the night. Klein thought that the public libraries would be closed by then, so he temporarily put aside the underground structure and prepared dinner for himself. He had wanted to learn to make Feyenopater noodles based on a recipe in the newspapers, but he ended up with noodles mixed in meat, sauce, and vegetables. To his surprise, it tasted pretty good. After having had his fill, Klein tossed a coin casually, divining if he should inform the police. He received a negative answer. The Backland evening was as serene as other cities, at least in Sherwood Borough. Klein was sleeping soundly, wandering through different dreams in an adrift manner when he suddenly realized, with a jolt, that he was dreaming. Someone is invading my dreams. Klein resisted the urge to frown and pretended to look around in confusion. He found himself in a scorching yellow desert. A roar suddenly came from the sky, and a huge monster dyed in black and gold flew over. The creature had a thick, lizard-like body and a pair of wide wings covered in a hide on its back. It descended and blotted out the sun in the sky. A dragon. A powerful dragon. Klein saw scales the size of a plate, a gaping mouth that emitted pure light, and 2 dark golden vertical pupils. Roar. The dragon spat out a beam of light that seemed to envelop everything. Soon, large swaths of the desert was obliterated. Amid the light, a figure jumped into the air. He was 3 or 4 meters tall, but he didn't have the unique vertical eye of the giants. He had a handsome, young face, and he wore black full-body armor which seemed to be spattered with blood. This giant knight swung his broadsword upwards, and countless bluish-white flames, which appeared a little purple, condensed into long spears. They shot at the dragon. It was as if he had an entire army of illusory Beyonders helping him in battle. In the midst of the meteor shower, the giant knight leaped onto the head of the dragon, and he swung his sword down. The afterimages he had created earlier instantly overlapped, and the sword rays turned into intersecting lightning. Pow! The ground shook wildly, and the dragon fell, splattering its dark gold blood. At that moment, the scene changed to a huge bloody door. It was the same bloody door that Klein had seen in the ancient structure that very afternoon. With a creak, the bloody door opened a crack, allowing him to catch a glimpse of a black high-back chair. A man of normal height sat on the high-back chair. He had his head lowered, silent and deathly still. As his vision got closer and closer, Klein saw the man's clothes clearly. He seemed to be the knight that had just killed the dragon, and he was still wearing the black armor that was stained with blood. The only difference was that he was no longer 3 or 4 meters tall. At this moment, the man suddenly raised his head. His handsome, young face had terrifying signs of decay, his eyes ice-cold and emotionless. Klein jumped in fright and awoke from his dream. Opening his eyes, he saw the crimson moonlight shining through the curtains. Chapter 263. spiritual perception, and attempt. Under the dim crimson moonlight, Klein pulled back his blanket and got up. For a seer, putting weight on dreams was a basic requirement, and the dream he just had could never be dismissed as a simple nightmare. Dressed in relatively comfortable clothes, he came before the full-body mirror and said in a low voice, "I dreamed of the blood-stained door in that room." Miss Bodyguard's figure slowly outlined itself above the mirror. She replied expressionlessly, "The influence of the evil spirit's aura. It will gradually weaken until it disappears." "Is that so?" Klein nodded slightly and returned to the side of the bed. He picked up the gold pocket watch and popped it open. Seeing that it was still early, he lay back down to sleep. This time, he no longer encountered the same dream as before. Sunday morning, the next day, in high spirits, Klein made himself a soft-boiled egg to go with buttered bread. In the Lone Kingdom, or rather in the countries of the northern continent, it was a must for gentlemen to read the newspapers at breakfast, and Klein was no exception. He opened up the newspapers he subscribed to, the Tussock Times, Backlund Morning Post, and Backlund Bulletin. The Civil Servant Unified Examination Bill has been officially passed by the House of Lords. The first examination will be held in early December, and the second examination will be held at the end of January next year. The final interview will be held 2 weeks after that. Within a week, the government will announce the positions and requirements involved in this exam and begin the registration process. Reporters surmise that most of it will be held in Backlund. Klein scanned the contents, picked up his cup, and sipped his Sib black tea. He couldn't help but think of Benson and thought to himself, the bill is passed at the end of September. The positions will be announced in the beginning of October, and registrations will be completed by early November. The examinations will start at the beginning of December. The timing is tight and very unreasonable. That implies how much of a rush the king and the prime minister is in to have this enacted, but that's advantageous for Benson. He prepared 2 months ahead of everyone else. Even if he can't compare to the elite graduates of the universities, he would definitely be able to beat most of his competition. And the positions the elites are aiming for wouldn't clash with his. He should be fine. Klein wanted to tap his chest 4 times to draw out a crimson moon and say, "May the goddess bless him." But then he remembered that Miss Bodyguard was nearby and resisted the urge. After all, he had claimed to be a believer of the god of steam and machinery. After finishing his last mouthful of bread, he continued reading the papers. Both houses have passed the National Atmospheric Pollution Council bill, allowing the government to set up such an organization. The coming month will be a critical period for the various parties to become a member of the council. An independent alkali industry public prosecutor has been approved with the goal of minimizing the pollution levels in acid and alkali factories. The 5th page doesn't have an advertisement for the purchase of goods from the Ernst firm. There's no need to consider participating in the Beyonder gathering tomorrow night. Tingen City, 2 Daffodil Street. Benson read and reread the news in the papers, forgetting the bread on his plate. The Civil Servant Unified Examination Bill was passed. Dressed in a long black dress, Melissa looked at her brother, who was acting oddly. The newspapers from the past few days had been playing up the bill that would be passed this time. Benson finally put down the newspaper, wiped his black hair, and exhaled slowly. Yes. At this moment, the 2 of them suddenly fell into silence. The room was completely silent. It even lacked the sound of knives and forks colliding with the dining plates. The indescribable atmosphere was broken by Bella, the maid who came out of the kitchen. Benson smiled and said, "This is foreseeable. Actually, the most important thing is the previous piece of news." "Oh." Melissa's expression was unusually quiet. Benson took a bite of his bread and smiled. "The news that the Backlund Polytechnic of Technology will be restructured into a university. It'll formally accept students next year. It won't need tests on grammar and classical literature, but will instead focus on the technical aspects. It's very suitable for graduates and students of technical schools everywhere. Melissa, I think you can try." "But," Melissa subconsciously retorted. Benson interrupted her with a smile. Its tuition will be half as cheap as the Tingen, Perth, Cabot, and Backlund and the other universities. It's equivalent to the Constant Industry University in Midseashire, and there will be even more opportunities for scholarships. Melissa, don't you like machinery, steam, and this stuff? This is the best opportunity for you to have access to much advanced and deeper knowledge. Give it a try, how about it? Don't worry about wasting money. Although that money can allow us to maintain our present lives without working, we're still young. We must not define our lives like this. As you can see, compared to a few months ago, my grammar has improved a lot. It might be better if we change environments. I know you can't bear to part with Tingen and this place. Well, we'll come back eventually, but not when we're young. Melissa looked at the various components on the coffee table as her lips moved a few times, and she said, "What about Bella?" After Klein's death, she didn't want to hire any more maidservants, but when she thought of how tragic Bella's life would be after she lost her job, she gave up on the idea. After all, the extra expense of 5 soldi a week was already nothing to the Morty family, which had an annuity of at least £300. To this, Benson shook his head and laughed. There are still a few more months before that happens. We can let Bella find a new job ahead of time. Before that, we will continue to pay her and provide her with a bedroom. Furthermore, her cooking skills are much better than before, so she can apply to be a chef at someone's home. It's a pity. Heh. Of course, everything depends on the premise that you can pass the entrance exams at Backlund's University of Technology. He had wanted to say that it was a pity that Bella didn't have much time to learn how to cook, but after looking at Melissa's gloomy expression, he forcefully changed the topic. Before Melissa could say anything, Benson smiled and touched his hair. "I'm planning on resigning tomorrow and will focus on preparing for the exam. Most of the positions are said to be in Backlund. That's my goal. I hope we can go there together." Melissa was silent for a moment before she slowly nodded her head. At the same time, she put down her fork and knife, wiped her mouth with a napkin, and said, "I'm going to the bathroom." "All right." Benson watched his sister leave the dining table, and the smile that had been plastered over his face rapidly vanished. He took out the silver pocket watch with the vine leaf patterns, took a close look at it, and sighed very quietly. During the whole of Sunday, Klein busied himself with the public libraries in the Sherwood borough in search of information related to Viscount Pound. But the Viscount's family didn't have a single biography, nor did it arouse the interest of any historian to conduct a special study. They were scattered across the annals of history, and Klein, who had no search function to use, felt a throbbing pain in his head as he faced the vast collection of books and essays. He spent 6 hours browsing through a lot of information, but failed to find any useful information. "I have to find someone who has a deep knowledge of the history of the nobility. Or I have to bribe someone in the police department to get the address of Baronet Pound. He's an aristocrat, and the police department must have a corresponding record, and there aren't many aristocrats." When Klein got home, he stood in front of the mirror and talked to the air. The surface of the mirror quickly outlined Miss Bodyguard's Gothic regal dress and the black bonnet on her head. She nodded slightly, as if agreeing with Klein. She then suddenly spoke out in a dreamy voice. "The employment period is over." "I know, the 3 days are up." Klein thought for a moment and asked, "If I can obtain some clues about the Pound family, would you like to know?" Miss Bodyguard didn't answer but gave a slight nod. Through Merrick?" Klein asked. After nodding her head again, Miss Bodyguard bent down, lifted up her skirt, and bowed. Her figure quickly disappeared, and the reflection in the mirror was no longer anything special. Klein looked around and didn't relax as a result of that. He proceeded systematically to prepare dinner and fill his stomach. He waited until it was late in the night before returning to his bedroom and drew back the curtains. Then, he took out the iron cigar case and reached out to touch Rasego's all-black eye. A series of illusory roars immediately rampaged through his mind, seeming to tear apart his mind and destroy his thoughts. With great difficulty, Klein resisted the pain which was making his head explode. Once again, he saw the black threads spreading out from different parts of his body. They were densely packed and illusory, reaching out endlessly. he quickly released his grip to escape from the negative influence. After nearly a minute, everything returned to normal. Phew, I can finally go up to the gray fog and verify the spiritual perception I had before. Klein silently said to himself as he quickly set up the ritual, summoned himself, and responded to himself. Then, in his spirit form, he carried Isaac's copper whistle, picked up the iron cigar case, and returned above the gray fog. Klein sat at seat of honor at the ancient long table, using his fingers to create spiritual flames and burning the blood-stained documents in the corner and any other items that were no longer needed. When he was done, he opened the iron cigar case and was surprised to find that the all-black eye had become silent, no longer showing any signs of madness, but that corruptive influence was still settling within. It just wasn't active, as if it was in hibernation. As expected, it's impossible to separate them directly, Klein muttered. Following that, on the other side of the ancient table, a man in a hooded robe appeared. Just like his previous attempt to create a clone, this man was stiff and lifeless. It was obvious that he wasn't someone real at a glance. There was no way he could deceive the members of the Tarot Club. However, Klein already had an idea regarding this. He extended his hand and held the all-black eye. There was silence in his ears, and there were no longer any terrifying howls. Using the amassed Bayunder characteristic, he could see that there were also black threads floating out from the fake body opposite him. Soon after, Klein carefully let his spirituality spread out through the all-black eye, touching a few of the illusory threads. All of a sudden, he felt like he was holding onto something. With a thought from him, the fake person raised his hand. It worked. I can use the ability of the Marionetist to create a fake Tarot Club member. However, this is draining on me. I'm unable to maintain a second one. The symbol on the back of the chair won't change accordingly, but it's not like Miss Justice and the rest can see it. Klein happily practiced, over and over again, even learning how to manipulate his clone's throat and mouth to let him speak. When his spirituality was almost exhausted, he smiled and said to the fake person in front of him, "Welcome, new member. Which tarot card do you wish to draw?" After saying that, he closed his mouth. The fake person opposite him lifted his hand to stroke his chin as he laughed hoarsely. "World." "I choose the card The World." Chapter 264, a 5-person gathering. If the Fool signified the beginning of the Tarot Club, then the World signified the end, a perfect ending of a cycle and sublimation. Klein had named his Smurf The World, because he hoped that it would lead to a beautiful beginning and end. In the future, I'll be able to make the world make requests or do things that wouldn't be convenient for me. This will greatly reduce the possibility that my image as Mr. Fool will collapse. With an alt, no, a Smurf truly is what makes life complete. Klein sighed in relief and waved the world away. Following that, he spread out his spirituality, wrapped himself, and stimulated a descent into the gray fog and returned to the real world. He had left Risego's all-black eye above the gray fog. After all, he couldn't usually use the item anyway, and he had to constantly worry about having it discovered by others or losing it. After putting away the summoning ritual materials, Klein looked up towards the crimson moonlight that passed through the curtains, filled with anticipation for tomorrow's gathering. When it came to understanding the aristocracy, he believed that Miss Justice would definitely surpass 99% of the people of Lone. And with his Smurf, The World, he could directly ask her about the Pound family without worrying about affecting his image as the Fool. Of course, this had to be done in a more tactful manner. After all, Detective Sherlock Moriarty was also looking for information on the Pound family, and only with enough information would he be able to perform a divination above the gray fog. Phew. Klein thought hard for a while before he relaxed and fell asleep. After entering the gray fog, it was as though the remnants of the evil spirit's aura had completely disappeared. Klein slept until dawn, but he didn't see the sun because of the thin fog outside. He continued as planned, heading to the rest of the public libraries in Backlund, but he no longer queried the librarians nor did he mention the Pound family. He only leafed through the materials concerning the nobility by himself. At 20 minutes to 3 in the afternoon, Klein entered the mysterious space above the gray fog ahead of time. Inside the vast and ancient palace, he sat down at the seat belonging to the fool. He conjured the fake world on the opposite side of the mottled bronze table as he familiarized himself with operating the world. After a few minutes, Klein took out his pocket watch and glanced at it, sending a message to the crimson star that symbolized the sun to prepare for the gathering. While he waited, he played with the all-black eye and fitted it with a silver chain. Then he wound it around his right wrist and covered it with his sleeve. At 3 in the afternoon, rays of light shot out from the palace that resembled a giant's residence. Justice, the Hanged Man, and the sun each projected a blurry silhouette dyed in crimson. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool Tilda, good afternoon." Audrey was about to greet every member of the Tarot Club when her gaze suddenly fell upon the figure seated at the very end. It was a stranger wearing a hooded black robe. He was also illusory and hazy. "This is—" Audrey looked at Mr. Fool with both puzzlement and delight. "Has the Tarot Club grown bigger again? Is it for Zorzio? No, the height doesn't match. Is it someone else?" While Audrey was deep in thought, Klein leisurely leaned back and said, "This is a new member, Mr. World." At the same time, through his gray, fog-augmented spirit vision, he discovered that the surface color of the sun's astral projection had become a little purer, but it had yet to reach the standards of Sequence 8. His initial judgment was that the sun had completely digested the barred potion. "Hello." Audrey greeted politely, curiously scrutinizing the new member. She quickly read some of the corresponding details through the hazy fog. Mr. World is a person who is reserved. He seldom moves and always wears a straight face. I wonder where he's from. Lone? Intis? Or a place as mysterious as the City of Silver? Audrey nodded thoughtfully. After so many gatherings, she had deduced one thing from the fact that the sun couldn't engage in their conversations. That was, that he was most likely not speaking the Lone language, and that the information that he heard was most likely translated by Mr. Fool. After the Hanged Man, Alger, and the sun, Derek, greeted the world respectively, to which the newcomer gave a rather cold response, Klein looked at Justice and said, "The 2 candidates you have nominated are still under examination. I'll give you a simple task. You can entrust it to them in your name. This is part of the examination. It should be this strict." Not only was Audrey not disappointed, she even felt that it was only necessary. The members of the Tarot Club must be strictly selected. Not just anyone can become one. She thought proudly before adding in a somewhat guilty tone, "And for me to be pulled in by Mr. Fool at the very beginning shows that I was lucky, and luck is a unique quality as well." "All right, please issue the mission." Audrey gave an affirmative answer. Klein stretched out his right hand and placed it on the table, showing a picture of Lainvis and his dressing. "Investigate the man in the painting. He's in Backlund." Klein had the portrait appear in front of Miss Justice. Audrey looked over and saw a young man with neatly combed black hair and round glasses. He had a full forehead. It was a colored oil painting, with taunting brown eyes that seemed abnormally protruded, and at the bottom were the words formerly known alias, Lainvis, and other information. It's a simple mission, which means that the target isn't strong. However, there must be something special about him that makes Mr. Fool aware of his existence. Although it's a simple mission, there might be a deeper purpose behind it. For someone as powerful as him, it shouldn't just be a test. Audrey momentarily allowed her to throng her mind. Only after a few seconds did she say, "I'll entrust it to them." The 2 ladies seemed to have many connections in Backlund which would serve to help in finding Lainvis. After confirming the matters pertaining to his revenge, Klein fell silent, and he deliberately allowed his smurf to take center stage. The world surveyed the area and spoke with a hoarse voice. "Mr. Fool told me that I can issue missions and gather ingredients here. Is that so?" "Yes." Audrey elegantly nodded and said, "However, you need to wait patiently. What's going to happen next is Mr. Fool's reading time. I completed my mission to assassinate Intis Ambassador Backerland, but I didn't even mention it to occupy this period of time," she thought, raising her chin slightly. "Miss Justice, you really have a great sense of mastership. I'll have to pay the price of knowledge later so that the assassination of Backerland can truly come to an end. Klein looked away, amused, and looked over at the hanged man. Alger Wilson didn't speak blindly because of the appearance of a new member. He remained silent and observed in secret. At this moment, when he saw Mr. Fool looking at him, he quickly and humbly bowed and said, "This time, there are still 6 pages. The final page will be given to you next time." "Sure," Klein nodded. The hanged man quickly focused his mind, recalled the contents, and expressed them with his mind. He quickly finished writing 6 pages of the diary and saw them suddenly vanish and appear in Klein's hands. Klein looked down and swept through the contents of the first page. 9th February. I have a 3rd child. I named him Bornova. My eldest daughter, Bernadette, was lucky. Her mother and I were just low-sequence Beyonders back then. She is free to choose the path she wants to take. My eldest son, Seal, is the most unfortunate. He inherited a minute amount of Beyonder characteristics, but he has to follow my path. Perhaps he could make changes at sequence 4, but attaining high sequences are never easy. My second son, Bornova, is in a better situation than Seal, but still worse than his sister. I have his characteristics equivalent to a sequence 5 Beyonder. This has reduced the burden on me, allowing me to digest my potion even faster, accelerating my advancement. And when he was just born, he was already showing various traits of an astromancer. Zaratul came to congratulate me in secret and praised Bornova as a lovely angel. I asked this master of divination what he would accomplish in the future. He only smiled and didn't answer me. When I asked him about Seal's future, he finally said that death is an inevitable ending, but that might be a good thing. Seriously, a seer's words are always so vague that it makes one want to pry their mouths open. When I finally asked about Bernadette's future, he suddenly became very serious. He said she would hate me, detest me, turn her back on me, and she would become an important figure in the mysterious world. Sometimes, you really shouldn't ask about the result of a divination. I find it hard to believe that my adorable and kind Bernadette, who cares for her brother, adores her father, and pampers her mother, would hate me and betray me. Why would that happen? What excessive act did I do? Maybe she'll have someone she loves, but I'm not satisfied with. Some punk that I'll end up killing. No, Zaratul isn't a soothsayer, and the divination he receives might be wrong. Forget it, Roselle. I think I smell the scent of some contrived family melodrama. After reading the first page of the diary, Klein couldn't help but lampoon silently. At the same time, he naturally recalled what Zaratul had told him about the future of Bernadette, an important figure in the mysterious world. Was this referring to the world of the Beyonders? What level would someone be deemed an important figure? Klein turned the pages thoughtfully. 22nd May. Florin of the Sauron family actually wants me to be his subordinate. Do I look like someone who would be a lackey? His attitude is simply unacceptable. I swear that I'll one day make him pay the price for his arrogance today. However, some of the things he mentioned are very interesting and worth pondering over. Chapter 265, Cards of Blasphemy. Florin said that the history of the Sauron family exceeds 2,000 years, making it longer than even the Church of the God of Craftsmanship's history. They witnessed all the cooperation and strife, light and darkness, in the 4th epoch, and they have survived until this very day. Other than the Augustus family of Lone, the Einhorn family of Fasak, and the Castia family of Phaenopotter, the other powerful families that have been deemed their equal, such as the Antigonus family and the Zaratul family, have been relegated as vestiges of history, or have turned to nothing but rats in the sewers, hiding from the public as shady existences. He said that making me his subordinate, a subordinate of the ancient and glorious Sauron family, is a gift to me. Back then, I wanted to fuck all 8 generations of his ancestors. However, for the Sauron family to have a history exceeding 2,000 years is indeed surprising. The 4th epoch is known as the Epoch of the Gods. Be it the 7 orthodox deities of the present times, or Death, primordial demoness, dark side of the universe, and the true creator, they all remained active in the real world. Legend had it that they frequently did miracles. For the Sauron family to last to this day and enjoy its current high standing, it's definitely not an easy matter. Their long history has given them far more than just arrogance. They must be hiding many secrets, and perhaps even extremely terrifying sealed artifacts. They are truly a colossus that stands tall above the earth, one that people can't look straight at. Upon reading this, Klein had a lot of ideas. For Roselle to be able to overthrow the rule of the Sauron family, he must have experienced a horrifying and heart-stirring struggle. Even if the Sauron family didn't have a Grade 0 sealed artifacts, they definitely had no lack of Grade 1 sealed artifacts. Adding to the possibility of having high-sequence Beyonders, even if the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery fully supported Roselle, it's unlikely that any good outcome might come out of it. Could it be that, before all of that happened, the Sauron family was already beginning to wane and weaken, and the Ainz Revolution was just an external manifestation of this state? What did they experience during that period of time? Did they lose sealed artifacts? Did the high-sequence Beyonders die? Did that attract the attention of many ambitious people? Judging from this diary, the Augustus family of Lone is no stranger to the Antigonus and Zaratul families. Internally, they should have corresponding records. The son had previously mentioned that the City of Silver has endured for more than 2,500 years in the Dark Ages. According to my initial judgment, that's the date of the cataclysm. In the past 200 years, the Sauron family claimed to have a history spanning more than 2,000 years. I wonder if it will extend to the point before the City of Silver. I'll try to find an opportunity to mention the Sauron clan and see the son's reaction. If the son still has a look of stupefaction, it would indirectly mean that the Sauron family only rose up after the cataclysm. Perhaps they had benefited greatly from the cataclysm to become nobles in the Fourth Epoch and royalty in the Fifth Epoch. Well, even if the son doesn't know, it doesn't prove it completely. Perhaps he didn't learn his history well. When Klein turned to the third page, he found that the content should have been written in the early days of Roselle's appointment as consul of the Ainz Republic. From the diary entries on this page, it can be seen that Roselle had developed and promulgated a new civil code which encouraged inventions, protected trade, and the incubation of the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't him merely satisfying his own warped humor of acting as this world's Napoleon and his ambition to change the world. What he did allowed him to reconcile with the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun. The Eternal Blazing Sun was also the god of deeds, the guardian of businesses. The closer to the times the civil code was, and the more prosperous trade was, made it more in line with the needs of the Church. Judging from this part of the diary, the relationship between Roselle and the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun was gradually thawing and beginning to improve. When he brazenly claimed the title of emperor more than 10 years later and called himself Caesar, it's likely that he obtained the simultaneous endorsement of the two churches. Otherwise, it would have been too risky. Then, what resulted in his assassination? Klein cast his gaze at the fourth page in puzzlement. 11th August. That retard Florin is showing off again. He said that he's the most promising member of the Sauron family generation to become a high-sequence Beyonder because he's very similar to his great-great-grandfather. Is there any necessary connection? I looked him up and down, left and right, but I couldn't find any sign of talent. Moreover, in the field of Beyonders, is talent important? Well, figuring out the essence to acting can be a core element of talent, but that's not necessary. As long as one knows the acting method and not be stupid enough to misunderstand the meaning, or avoid doing things that easily result in a loss of control, then one has a chance to completely digest the potions. Which is to say, just a bit more time and effort needs to be spent. In one's lifetime, it's not impossible to become a high-sequence Beyonder. The main obstacle to becoming a high-sequence Beyonder is the difficulty of obtaining Beyonder ingredients and the difficulty of corresponding rituals. Of course, I have to admit that those born as Beyonders have more time to prepare. Was Florin's great-great-grandfather a high-sequence Beyonder? Does looking like him imply talent? It can be seen that at the time of writing this diary entry, Roselle was still very young, and that he wasn't aware of the two laws of Beyonder characteristics' indestructibility and conservation. Klein nodded indiscernibly. With his current knowledge, he could probably understand the hidden meaning behind Florence Sauron's words. A high-sequence Beyonder's Beyonder characteristic remains contained a spirit mark. This was also one of the reasons why it was easy for people to lose control when concocting potions with this ingredient. And people who resembled the original owner could avoid this negative influence to the greatest extent. Their chances of success were higher than the average person, so they were considered gifted. How holy artifacts recognized their masters probably shared the same conditions. This achieves the same goal via different approaches as the acting method, but it can't be popularized. Once the advancement is successful, one would still have to do the acting method required of the potion to completely digest its characteristics. While in deep thought, Klein glanced at the 2 diary entries at the back of the page and discovered how much Emperor Roselle enjoyed the liberalness in Ainz, but he was worried that his future wife would be equally liberal. With the paper making some noise, Klein placed the 5th page at the top. 20th April. I participated in that ancient organization's secret gathering once again. Those members still leave me shaking. It's hard to believe that they're actually all members of this organization. This time, I learned some of the ancient organization's philosophy. They believe that people will always lose some of their individuality bit by bit, until they sleep. Hence, by trying hard to observe and remember oneself, one can use the various types of information to achieve the purification needed to face the final end of days. They've kept and passed down secrets for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. They believe that dusk is inevitable, and that doomsday cannot be avoided. They believe in the original creator and believe that he is not truly dead. When dusk comes and everything ends, he will wake up from his slumber and let everything return to him. He will create a new world, a new history. All of the actions from this organization stem from this belief. It can be said that they show great animosity to the true creator. They aren't stingy with their descriptions to describe him as fallen and evil. They wield the second blasphemy slate and the 22 paths of the divine, but they only allow members to choose a few of them, with the exception of those who were already Beyonders when they joined. Are there any secrets to these pathways? I'll first jot it down and analyze it in the future. These pathways are Bard, Sailor, Reader, and Spectator. Haha, I have to change my habits of calling these sequence pathways in the future. Using those names in that ancient organization makes me appear quite uneducated. This is very similar to what I've analyzed from my hostile relations, and from Mr. A's request, with it being very similar to how the Bard, Sailor, Reader, and Secret suppliant pathways can be exchanged at Sequence 4. Is Manipulator a high sequence of the Spectator pathway? Why do many secret organizations declare that the apocalypse would definitely befall us one day? For example, the Demoness sect, this ancient organization, and they themselves do not rely on this to proselytize. Is it a requirement for brainwashing, or would there really be a so-called dusk? Klein thought of many things, but due to a lack of information, he was unable to come to a definite answer. At the same time, he couldn't help but silently lampoon Roselle. Can't you just write down the name of that organization? Resisting the changes in his expression and body movements, Klein turned to the last page, which had relatively little content, and read. 1st Jan. A beginning of a new year. I happened to finish my first card of blasphemy. I will hide the ultimate secret of the 22 paths of the divine in these different cards of blasphemy and scatter them across the world. If things fail, they'll be the best insurance that my children can fall back onto. Haha, I'll disrupt the order they wish to have and spread the profound mysteries of the divine. These cards of blasphemy will possess characteristics of being anti-divination and anti-prophecy. Apart from the ones I'm giving my children, the fated ones will receive it. I'm a person who makes sure to square accounts when it comes to grudges, and after I die, who cares if floods deluge the heavens? Oh, I didn't create that sentence. In short, the more chaotic the world is, the better it is. I have to consider how to name the cards of blasphemy that will form a set. The Paths of the Divine number 22. The major arcana tarot cards also have 22 cards. They can match quite well, but there are a few that don't meet the requirements. I need to make some changes to match the original potion names. That ancient organization is my last and biggest insurance. I don't know if they'll support me, or the manner in which they'll support me in. I still remember the shock when I first saw the blasphemy slate. So it turns out that the Beyonder pathways are paths of the divine. It really is true that the blasphemy slate is blaspheming the deities. Above every pathway's sequence 1, there is still a sequence 0, and there's a corresponding potion and ritual. Each pathway can only have one sequence 0. And sequence 0 is the sequence of a true God. For example, sequence 0, Sun, chapter 266. The World's Commission. Sequence 0. There's still a sequence 0 above sequence 1. Sequence 0 is equivalent to a true God. There can only be one sequence 0 per pathway. Is this the true meaning of the paths of the divine? As long as one consumes the corresponding potion, does a ritual, and grasps the acting method to digest the Beyonder characteristic, an ordinary person can become a god one step at a time. This is truly blasphemous. Could the main ingredients of the final potion be the godhood, divine blood, and body of the eternal blazing sun? The information on the diary's last page was filled with so much information that Klein almost couldn't think. He almost made additional body movements. The 22 paths of the divine correspond to the 22 sequence 0s. Sequence 0, Sun, does sound very powerful. Perhaps there's a sequence 0, Death. I wonder what the names corresponding to the goddess and the lord of the storms are. According to Emperor Rosel's description, some of these cards are identical to the major arcana tarot cards, but some of them are different. The cards of blasphemy he created were standardized with the names of the potions. These can no longer be called potions. Could the reason that the Emperor regretted not choosing the seer, apprentice, marauder pathways be because their corresponding sequence 0s have yet to appear? Then, what was the reason for the sudden personification of the hidden sage who was symbolically a deity? What was Rosel plotting in the end? It feels like he became the enemy of everyone in the world, and that only seems possible if it was set into motion by that mysterious and ancient organization. The primordial demoness is the name of sequence 0 for the demoness pathway. Klein gradually found his train of thought, and he restrained the turmoil that was going through his mind. He knew that he couldn't lose himself in this matter. He had to recover as quickly as possible. Otherwise, Justice and the Hanged Man would discover something amiss and find it odd. Mr. Fool has been reading that page too long. I really want to obtain one of the cards of blasphemy that Emperor Rosel created. I want to know what else there is, other than the godhood-providing potion formulas and the corresponding rituals. Klein suppressed his shock and puzzlement and made Rosel's diary disappear from his hands. He rapped the corner of the bronze table and looked to the side. Miss Justice, well done. You finished Backerland in less than a week. According to the agreement, what kind of payment do you want? Backerland is dead. That fast? Alger had left the islands in the past few days and hadn't received the appropriate information. He was astonished for a moment, which made Audrey, who was secretly observing him, feel delighted. Even if Alger was in the capital of the Rorstad archipelago, the city of generosity, Bayam, he might not have been informed in a timely fashion. After all, cable telegraph could only transmit limited information. Unless it was particularly urgent or important, there was always a delay of a few days. Sometimes, it would even take the colonists of the Rorstad archipelago a month or two to get an update on the latest situation in the northern continent. Restraining his thoughts, the Hanged Man looked at Mr. Fool in the thick fog and respectfully said with a hint of humility, I'm very sorry. I just managed to contact someone and couldn't help. This is a commission, not a help request. Don't worry about it, Klein chuckled. He turned his gaze back to Miss Justice, waiting for her to say what she wanted in return. May the goddess bless me. Please don't let Miss Justice's request be too difficult. It's best if I can repay her with knowledge. I've learned quite a lot of amazing things from Roselle's diary." Klein silently prayed to the goddess. Of course, he was very clear that with the gray fog separating them, the Evernight goddess definitely wouldn't be able to hear his prayers. Audrey's eyes darted around as she thought for a few seconds. "Be honest and not greedy, Audrey, and stick to your principles." She gave a faint smile and said, "No, I'm actually the one still owing you. No, I owe your blessed the bounty." Vice Admiral Kalangos's bounty was worth a total of £30,000. I should give your blessed £15,000. Killing Backerland cost £10,000, so I still need to pay an additional £5,000. However, due to the matter with Backerland, my finances are recently quite tight. I can only pay this bounty in a few months. Mr. Fool, is that all right?" After she finished speaking, Audrey quietly exhaled. She felt that the little stone pressing against her heart was finally gone. Although discussing money and calculating the payment in front of Mr. Fool feels somewhat inappropriate, I can't hide the rewards I received from his blessed. Audrey sighed silently. As for the huge plantation worth more than £8,000, it was a private form of gratitude from Duke Negan and not a bounty. £5,000. I can get another £5,000. Kalangos's total bounty actually reached £30,000. Klein was startled. Immediately, he fell into an intense mental struggle. I'm supposed to pay this bounty to Mr. Azek, but I won't be able to get in touch with him for a long time. Putting the money aside would be a waste. I might as well use this money to enhance myself. When the time comes, I'll repay him by providing help. Klein made up his mind 3 seconds later as he lightly nodded at Miss Justice. "Sure." Upon hearing Mr. Fool's response, Audrey's graceful seating posture remained the same, but her heart was completely relaxed. At that moment, Klein leaned back in his chair and fell silent. Then he manipulated his smurf secretly from a commandeering position. The world coughed and said, "Can I speak now?" Audrey looked at Mr. Fool, and seeing that he didn't say a thing, she nodded slightly and said, "Sure." At the same time, she once again did a read on the new member, the world, and made a judgment. When I mentioned that the assassination of Ambassador Backerland was a result of my commissioning, he didn't show any shock or surprise. He either doesn't know the importance of the matter, not understanding the importance of an ambassador, or he's someone who can keep his calm and is good at hiding his emotions and bodily movements. The way he mouths his words doesn't match what he says. It should have been translated by Mr. Fool as well, which makes it impossible for me to get his original vocal tics or know what language he usually uses. Thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind before Mr. World's hoarse voice sounded. I wish to obtain the true root of a mistrint, at least 60 milliliters of its juice, as well as the spring of the elves' marrow crystals and the complete spinal fluid of a dark, patterned black panther. Which one of you can provide it, or provide any relevant clues? What do you wish to exchange them for? Klein added the Beyonder ingredient needed by the apothecary to his commission, so that the Tarot Club members wouldn't be able to guess the main ingredients of the formula he wanted. Before Justice and the Hanged Man could react, the son who had been silent the entire time finally opened his mouth and said, "I know where mistrints are, and I can help you obtain the materials. However, I must wait until I finish my advancement and have sufficient strength to join the corresponding patrol team." Recently, he had been accumulating merit points and rewards. He was working hard to obtain the main ingredients for the light suppliant through the City of Silver's officials and private markets. He was still lacking quite a bit, as expected of the dangerous City of Silver with its numerous monsters. Klein silently commented in admiration, allowing the world to ask, "Then what do you wish to receive in exchange?" Without hesitation, Derek replied, "A weapon that suits me and can increase my combat strength." The reason why he didn't mention the corresponding ingredients for light suppliant was because City of Silver had them all. They could be obtained through his own hard work. Upon hearing this request, Klein immediately thought of the inscribed steel sword that had appeared at the Beyonder gathering organized by the elderly gentleman, Eye of Wisdom. It was sharp enough, had the effect of exorcism and purification, and could be used for 3 years. It was valued at £500, perfectly matching the son's described requirements. Why didn't you say so earlier? It has already been bought by someone else. Klein silently stared at the members while the world nodded and said, I will find a weapon that meets your requirements as soon as possible. Is this transaction to be witnessed by Mr. Fool? Klein nodded slightly to express his agreement. At that moment, Audrey shot a glance at the son and warned him. Apart from the mist Treent's juice, Mr. World's requested ingredients correspond to a sequence 7. The rough price is about £500 to £700. She felt that the son was too naive and was worried that he would be cheated by the unreadable Mr. World with cheap weapons. Although Mr. Fool is impartial and advocates fair equal exchange, it's not his place to stop it if both sides agree. After all, some items are of low value, but there are people who are in urgent need, so adding a premium to the price is very normal. Audrey thought to herself. A sequence 7 formula is about £800, Alger added. He had an instinctive aversion towards new members. Klein translated with great difficulty, for he didn't know what the currency unit of the pound corresponded to in the city of Silver, and could only use a Series 9 potion formula as a unit. I understand. Derek slightly nodded and then quietly added, Thank you. The world maintained his silent and staid temperament and didn't comment on what had just happened. He turned to Justice and the Hanged Man, waiting for their response. Audrey thought for a few seconds and said, Potion formula for psychiatrist and their corresponding Beyonder ingredients. That's sequence 7 of the spectator pathway. You can gather the information first, and there's no rush to purchase them. Once I have clues regarding the dark patterned Black Panther and Spring of the Elves marrow crystals, we can proceed. If you are willing to exchange it for gold pounds, you can buy it at any time. Although I'm out of money recently, I can still raise quite a bit if it's urgent. Audrey comforted herself. Alger said in a deep voice, Potion formula of the Sailor Pathways sequence 6 Wind Blessed. This will be more expensive than the Beyonder ingredients that you want, combined. If you find it, you can think of the additional payment needed to make up for the difference. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to help you gather those ingredients. Even if it's just one of them, you don't need to expend any resources ahead of time. Mr. Hanged Man should have a close relationship with the Church of Storms. He should be able to get the wind-blessed formula normally, right? Is he trying to hide the fact that he's digesting the Seafarer potion quickly? Klein was startled. All right, the world answered in a low voice and then said, I have another request. Chapter 267, Singing to the Same Tune. The world looked around and said, I want to get information about all the abject nobles in the Lone Kingdom, including their current addresses. The more details, the better. He didn't directly mention Baronet Pound, since Detective Sherlock Moriarty was currently handling an investigation regarding an underground structure that involved the Pound family. Klein didn't want Justice to figure out the world's identity through this connection. I can't ignore any details. He emphasized to himself. Audrey stared blankly upon hearing that. She once again examined the member at the end of the long bronze table and probed, What do you want to do? The world laughed with a hoarse voice. That's not something you need to worry about. I'm only searching for some things. I won't do them any harm. I can swear on this point and allow Mr. Fool to bear witness. Mr. World is really good at controlling his body language. Is his sequence the nemesis of a spectator or telepathist? Audrey thoughtfully nodded and said, I know some information about abject aristocrats, but it's not sufficiently detailed, concrete, or comprehensive. I need some time to gather all of it. It'll take 3 or 4 days, is that okay? As a noble, it was compulsory to have some knowledge about people in the same class. Audrey would always hear interesting stories when she attended various balls, banquets, and saloons, but they would all be fragmented and could hardly be considered a comprehensive body of knowledge. After all, she wasn't an expert in this field, and she still needed to fill in the details by flipping through books, asking around, and checking references to not miss any abject nobles. No problem. The world laughed deeply. Then, what payment would you like in return? The things I can pay you with right now are some secret history from the fourth epoch, knowledge of some Beyonder pathways, and a few formulas. But frankly, I don't think that information concerning abject nobles is worth sequence 7 or 8 potions. If you have any other requests, I can attempt to complete them. It's not of equal value to sequence 8 or 7 potion formulas, which means I'm unable to make a corresponding request for the psychiatrist formula. Audrey began to ponder seriously. During this process, she sneaked a glance at Mr. Fool, hoping for a hint, only to discover that Mr. Fool was shrouded in the gray fog and had no reaction whatsoever. He was like a god staring at the land beneath him. All right. Audrey finally made a decision and smiled. I want to hear about knowledge regarding other Beyonder pathways, but this is on the premise that I'm not aware of them. Dear Mr. Fool, can you be the judge for this? Yes, Klein answered calmly. Then let's have a private conversation. Audrey looked at the world. At that moment, Klein rapped the table, isolating the son and the hanged man from hearing or seeing the exchange. He deliberately nodded to his smurf, indicating that they could begin their private conversation. The world looked at Miss Justice and spoke with his usual hoarse voice. Do you know anything about the Demoness sect? Audrey recalled the information she paid the hanged man Alger £1,000 for, and answered briefly with caution. I know what they believe in and what era they began from, as well as the Beyonder pathways they control and the inclination of their upper echelons. The world laughed hoarsely and said, I understand. You don't know much. The Demoness sect controls the assassin pathway. The sequence 8 is instigator. That's what I know, Audrey said, partially to inform the world and partially to show her anticipation. The world raised his hand and stroked his chin before saying, Then, do you know the corresponding sequence 7? Audrey shook her head slightly. I'll be very happy to hear it from you. The assassin pathway's sequence 7 is called Witch, the world said simply. Witch? Audrey jumped in fright at this word. She naturally made the corresponding connections in her mind. Then, if a man consumes this potion, how is he supposed to act? Wearing beautiful dresses and putting on exquisite makeup, imitating a lady's every move. She was a little disgusted, yet strangely amused as the thought came to her. No, Miss Justice. When a man consumes this potion, he will no longer be considered a male. He will become a true lady. Klein resisted the urge to chortle as he controlled the world's response. Goddess, the witch potion can change a person's sex, Audrey blurted out. This is really unbelievable. Mr. Fool didn't deny it, which means it's true. This is simply a miracle. This is the mysterious Beyonder world. This is a world filled with all sorts of inexplicable things. This is the world I long for. Why am I feeling a little excited? After calming down a little, Audrey quickly and guiltily glanced at Mr. Fool and made a tiny confession that she had actually chanted the name of the Evernight goddess in front of him. The world said in a low, hoarse voice, Yes, but it can only make men become women. Women will accordingly have their charms enhanced. Whether it's their appearance or skin condition, they will become significantly improved on the basis of their original looks. This is the reason why the upper echelons of the Demoness sect are all women. Then, what flaws does it have? Audrey suddenly felt her interest was aroused. The world answered in an unhurried manner. The requirement for their acting is to become evildoers who bring about calamity, disease, and pain. Audrey exhaled slightly and felt a little disappointed. Her mind whirled quickly, and she immediately had a new question. If, and I'm saying if, an animal consumes the witch formula without dying or losing control, would the enhancement of its charms be more suited to human tastes or focused on charms for its own species? For example, a female cat which makes all male cats, and all cat lovers become fanatical towards it. The world was momentarily unsure how to respond. After a few seconds, he said, I've never studied such matters. Before Audrey could ask further, he added, The corresponding sequence 6 for the witch pathway is pleasure, or the demoness of pleasure. The requirement for acting is to bring pleasure to both men and women, mainly in that aspect, as well as controlling or influencing them. The demonesses of this sequence are very good at using special spider silk. Audrey gaped her beautiful mouth, then she silently closed it again, deeply regretting her pinings from before. By knowing such information, it will allow you to effectively identify demonesses. Heh, are you pleased with this payment? The world asked. Audrey nodded gently and said, "It helps me a lot. The deal is completed. I will help you gather information on the abject nobles as soon as possible. Shall I give it to you the next time we meet?" The world thought for a moment and asked, "Can it be faster?" "Then I'll offer the information I gathered to Mr. Fool and request that he bestow them to you." "Mr. Fool, is that okay?" Audrey turned her head and asked. In the thick gray fog, Klein nodded his head in agreement. At the same time, he busily controlled the world to whisper. He detected the different way she said the word. Noticing the world's astonishment, the corners of Audrey's mouth curled up slightly, her eyes rolling upwards as she intentionally didn't make any explanation. Klein rapped the long bronze table, indicating the end of the private exchange. Then, he once again manipulated the world to say, "I have one more problem. This newcomer has indeed accumulated a lot of requests." Audrey looked over, unsurprised. Alger and Derek both indicated they were listening through their body language. The world said hoarsely, "I want to know if there are any more high-sequence Beyonders in the Sauron family in Ainz." While the world spoke, Klein looked at the sun through the corners of his eye and saw that the youth didn't have any additional reaction. From the looks of it, the City of Silver doesn't have records of the Sauron family. This family most likely made an uprising after the cataclysm. Klein looked around thoughtfully and discovered Justice and the Hanged Man looking at each other, obviously unaware of the answer. The sun was undoubtedly at a loss and silent, thus he lightly tapped the table again and said, "Let me answer this question. What can you pay for it?" Before he could finish his sentence, Klein hurriedly controlled the world to say, a sequence 7 formula. "Okay, deal." Klein created an environment for a private exchange as he silently stared at his Smurf for a few seconds. Audrey and Alger, who were blocked, once again felt how unfathomable Mr. Fool was. They were both curious about the answer, but they also felt that it was of no use to them. It wasn't worth it to spend a sequence 7 potion formula in exchange for that. After the private exchange, Klein deliberately made the world bow and say in a hoarse voice, "Honorable Mr. Fool, thank you for your answer. It was very helpful to me. This is an equivalent exchange. There's no need to thank me." Klein endured the goosebumps that suddenly surfaced on his skin as he answered indifferently. The open communication that followed lasted less than 10 minutes. Then he announced the end of tarot gathering before severing the connections with the Crimson Stars. After the figures of Justice, the Hanged Man, and the sun dissipated into streams of light, Klein looked at the world and chuckled. With a Smurf, a lot of things are really much more convenient. Unfortunately, the all-black eye cannot be used outside the gray fog. What a pity! As he thought that, he controlled the world to stand up and bow, then he let it melt into the majestic palace. As he had to divert some of his attention in order to control his Smurf, Klein had expended a great deal of his spirituality. He didn't continue staying in that space, and after retrieving the all-black eye and placing it behind the bronze table, he immediately returned to the real world. At that moment, there was a rare case of backland sunshine, seen in autumn or winter behind the tightly shut curtains. Klein didn't have the time to take in this view. He slept for half an hour to recover some of his energy. After waking up, due to having gained Miss Justice's promise and the fact that it wasn't urgent, he had no plans on searching for information at the library, and instead decided to head to one of the many cemetery sites on the outskirts of Backland before nightfall. Klein was going to test the influence of Azek's copper whistle to understand its scope and limitations. Of course, the experiment would only be carried out after dark. The reason why he was heading out now was that it would be very strange and very eye-catching to hire a carriage to visit a cemetery in the evening. Chapter 268, The Cemetery and the Hospital. When the steam metro arrived at the southern bank of the Tussock River, Klein rented a carriage and headed to the Aston Cemetery on the outskirts of the Southborough, which was managed by the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. Under the darkness of dusk, the trees around the cemetery seemed to bare their fangs and brandish their claws, blocking out the light like monsters lurking in the darkness. After the carriage driver took the 4 solely Klein paid, he looked at the cemetery and muttered, "Do you need me to wait here for you?" "No, there's no need. I'm here to visit a friend." Klein came up with an excuse, and he immediately noticed the change in the driver's face. This is a cemetery. To visit a friend with the sky already dark. The driver could hear his own heart thumping. Klein jolted to his senses, smiled, and added, "He's the tomb keeper here." The carriage driver was immediately relieved, but he didn't dare stay. He quickly drove the horses and left. Klein circled the graveyard until the night truly set in. After dark, the smoke and dust emissions decreased by a lot. In addition to the biting cold wind, the fog in the air thinned a lot. Although few stars could be seen, the crimson moon made a furtive appearance, covering the ground with a veil-like glow. Klein tapped his chest 4 times clockwise, drawing out the crimson moon. Then he put on his gloves, pushed himself over the iron fence, and entered the cemetery. He looked around with a high degree of caution, randomly found a secluded corner, took out Ainz's copper whistle and held it in his hand. Not far in front of him was a tombstone. The photograph on it was dirty, and the epitaph appeared extremely blurry in the moonlight. Klein carefully read it for a few seconds before figuring out what they were. "Friend, if you are passing by, help me up." "Thanks, a very humorous gentleman. I choose you." Klein stopped, leaned back against the trees that sheltered the grave from the sun and rain, and waited patiently in the cold, chilly night. He threw Ainz's copper whistle up before catching it firmly, repeating it several times to pass the time until 20 minutes later. No signs of the dead coming back to life. Klein clicked his pocket watch shut, surveyed his surroundings, and confirmed the results. "I'll come back here in 2 days to see if there are any additional changes. If there are none, it means that Mr. Ainz's copper whistle won't be able to affect corpses that have been laid to rest through a priest's ritual." Klein silently muttered to himself, and he put the ancient and exquisite copper whistle back into his pocket. There were 3 kinds of burials in the Lone Kingdom. The first type had coffins and corpses, suitable for the middle and upper classes living in abundance. The second type was the ones without corpses, so a cremation was held. The remaining ashes were placed in urns. This was the choice of the lower middle class and technical workers who could pay for the cremation, but found coffins to be too wasteful. But there were also times when religious and governmental factors had an impact, such as the believers of the eternal blazing sun. The majority of them underwent cremation, and the poor people only needed to pay a small fee for the cremation due to the help they received from the government. The third only belonged to the poor. They couldn't afford coffins, and they didn't wish for cremation, so they just wrapped the corpses up and buried them. But Klein had already determined from the tombstones and tombs that the target of his experiment was the kind which involved a coffin and a corpse. If Ainz's copper whistle really can cause the dead to rise, even if the target had rotted into a pile of bones, there shouldn't be a complete lack of reaction. Even if the lid of the coffin cannot be opened, it should have at least created a dull thud. As he walked towards the fence, Klein suddenly thought of a non-rigorous part of the experiment. Yes, I need to categorize them. The corpses here have been buried for quite a while. I should find a target that was recently buried. Only by doing so will I be able to arrive at the most accurate conclusion. After that, Klein basically played a game of cat-and-mouse with the cemetery guardians before finding a grave that had completed a burial ceremony during the day. This time he waited for half an hour, but he still didn't find anything abnormal. "Phew, I can basically determine that Mr. Ainz's copper whistle can't affect a corpse that has undergone a ritual that puts the soul to rest. That's quite weak, no, that's not right. This copper whistle isn't meant to cause the dead to come alive. It's used to summon messengers, so affecting a corpse is a negative effect." Klein tightened his double-breasted coat and walked toward the iron fence. He planned on heading home to have a change of clothes before trying out his second experiment. The target of the second experiment group or the recently deceased corpses that haven't been laid to rest via ritual. Such targets often existed in a hospital's morgue. Climbing over the fence, Klein made his way back to the Southborough on foot in the dreary, dark night. The surroundings were deathly still and quiet. Only the evergreen, dust-covered trees lightly swayed. It reminded him of the night he had been resurrected from the dead. Back then, he too had to walk from the cemetery to the city. Sigh. Klein sighed and suddenly began to run, as if trying to get rid of the melancholy that filled him. More than half an hour later, he rented a carriage in Southborough and headed for the nearest steam metro station. There was still about an hour before the metro stopped running, and this could save him quite a bit of money. In the wee hours of the morning, Klein changed into a grayish-blue worker's uniform and wore a cap as he made his way to St. Estin's Hospital in the Backland Bridge area. This was a charity hospital belonging to the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. Many of the poor died here due to illness, and since there was nowhere for them to place their bodies, they had to be kept in the hospital morgue. There, the corpses awaited cremation from the government or be donated to the medical schools. This phenomenon was very common in summer, but there weren't many in the autumn or winter after it cooled down. However, in an era without air conditioning or equipment to keep the temperature cool, the hospital's morgue couldn't keep the corpses for too long. Donated bodies would be quickly embalmed, and bodies to be buried the next day would be cleaned up. Of course, these were the rules enforced in summer. In autumn and winter, the rules were relatively relaxed. Therefore, there were still many corpses left overnight in the morgue during this period. The morgue at St. Estin was underground. It was relatively cool, even during the summer, and was biting cold during autumn and winter. Based on what he had learned as a night hawk, Klein relied on a clown's agility and balance to sneak into the basement while avoiding the doctors and nurses that were on duty. Before he even got close to the morgue, he felt a chill down his spine. After quickly moving past the janitor's room, Klein took out a piece of wire and lightly unlocked the door to the morgue. This was one of the methods of infiltration and tracking. He slowly and silently pushed open the door to the morgue with his black-gloved right hand. At the same time, he cloaked Isaac's copper whistle in his spirituality to determine if such a method could eliminate the negative effects. The temperature in the morgue seemed to be lower than the corridor. Most of the corpses were bagged up and placed in different iron cabinets. Only a few were placed on the long table in the central open space, as if they were awaiting examination. As a Sequence 8 clown, Klein was no longer afraid of such scenes. He just instinctively felt uncomfortable. Carefully, he closed the door and walked around the long tables. After about 10 minutes, Klein let out a breath of cold air and confirmed that none of the corpses had come to life. It's about time. He took out his gold pocket watch and opened it. When he was ready, Klein withdrew his spirituality and stopped enveloping Isaac's copper whistle. He wasn't sure if it was a psychological effect, but he had a baffling feeling that the surroundings had become even more silent. As a seer, he fully believed in his instincts. He stopped pacing back and forth and retreated towards the door. Time ticked by, and Klein determined that it took about 2 minutes. At that moment, a corpse on a long table suddenly sat up. Bang! 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 The surrounding iron cabinets emitted a series of banging noises, as though all hell was about to break loose. Bang! 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 Upon hearing such a commotion and seeing the corpses sit up, Klein suddenly said in a low voice, "Crimson?" Immediately following that, he injected his spirituality into a requiem charm and threw it out. Icy blue flames burned quietly, and serene and gentle blackness spread out. The corpses lay down once again, and the banging sounds coming from the cabinets came to an abrupt halt. Klein, who had experienced a similar situation, didn't relax and used another requiem charm. As there were many corpses around him, he used a third charm to be safe, using up everything that he had. Not bad. Indeed, it only affects corpses that haven't been put to rest via a ritual. This includes corpses that haven't been dead for too long and zombies. Using my spirituality to shield the whistle can prevent such effects. Klein thought with a smile. Seeing that none of the corpses were making any abnormal reactions, he prepared to open the door and leave. At that moment, he suddenly heard footsteps coming from the outside and saw a faint light seeping in. The elderly janitor had been attracted by the banging sound in the morgue. He was approaching with a lantern in hand. Klein looked around. Placing his hand on the door, he nimbly jumped up, stopping at the spot between the door and the ceiling. His fingers dug into the bumps and cracks as he maintained perfect balance. Creak! The elderly janitor opened the door with his key and entered the morgue. He took a few steps forward, held up his lantern, and examined the iron cabinets and long tables, as well as the corpses. Behind him, Klein nimbly jumped down and landed silently. Seizing the opportunity, Klein quickly escaped from the morgue. He used the janitor's room to hide for a few seconds before carefully returning to the upper floor. After the elderly janitor surveyed the surroundings and didn't find anything out of the ordinary, he mumbled a sentence, in fear of the corpses, and quickly left. He locked the door and didn't stay any longer. Returning to the guardroom, he wrapped a thin blanket around himself and took several minutes to calm his racing heart before mumbling to himself in a low voice. Those old guys always tell me about the weird things that happen in the morgue, hoping to scare me. Those weird sounds just now should count as well. It doesn't matter. Those corpses didn't come back to life either. Pewee, there are no such things as zombies and wraiths. At the same time, Klein was walking comfortably along the quiet, dark streets, happy to be free of a latent threat. He looked at the elegant gas lamps that lined the sides of the street and looked forward to the future Beyonder gatherings. As long as he obtained a weapon with a special effect, he would be able to obtain one of the main ingredients of a magician. Although I don't have much money right now, I still have a lot of assets that I can use to exchange. For example, the telepathist potion formula or the formulas for Bard and Light Suppliant. Furthermore, my clown potion is digesting at a faster rate than I expected due to series of events and my discovery of the essence needed for acting. It's close to being completely digested. Along the streets of Backland at night, Klein left his mind wandering. Chapter 269. Clues to the Psychology Alchemists, on the outskirts of Empressborough, in a wide, empty horse track. Audrey Hall deliberately led a chestnut mare to a corner and pretended to discuss something with Viscount Glaint. She was wearing white pants and knee-high black boots, adorned with a simple blouse and a black jacket that reached her waist. In addition, she donned a helmet of the same color. She looked especially valiant and beautiful, and Susie, her golden retriever, was obediently sitting by her feet. What seemed like a tiny leather satchel hung from her back. Disguised as Viscount Glaint's servant, Zio glanced enviously at Audrey's long, straight legs and unconsciously tiptoed. Just horse riding is so blasé. Only when it is combined with hunting does it become imbued with life. Of course, I mean the equestrian skills for men. No matter what a beautiful lady does, it would still be a sight to behold. Glaint sized up Audrey and said half-jokingly. Audrey replied with a slight smile, "The next hunt is still months away." Every year, from June to the new year, the aristocrats of the Lone Kingdom would come to Backland to attend various banquets, dances, and salons, as per tradition. This was a very important event for them, and many things would be decided within a few months. After the new year, the nobles would return to their fiefdom, their castles, country estates, and large plantations, and spend their leisure time there. In such times, the most popular sport was hunting. The nobles would invite guests of similar status to enjoy the pleasure of horse riding and chasing prey. As long as their financial situation allowed it, they weren't stingy with buying hounds. The most famous of the hounds was the foxhound. I already miss that life. Backland is a place where people feel constrained, and its air is indescribably terrible. Of course, I still enjoy its extravagance. Viscount Glaint wore his gloves and stepped back to make it easier for Audrey to talk to Zio and Fours. "Honorable Miss Audrey, why have you called us here this time?" Zio initiated the question as she retracted her gaze. Audrey took a large portion of most of her recent income. She was honest and generous, a rarely encountered good employer. I seem to smell the ink of money again. Hopefully, the mission wouldn't be too difficult. Miss Audrey is perfect in every way except for one thing. Every mission is unexpected and very dangerous, Zio thought, feeling both anticipation and apprehension. She couldn't help but glance sideways at Fours. She noticed that her companion, disguised as a maid, was looking right at her. The expressions reflected in their eyes looked very similar. Audrey held her gloves, smiled reservedly and elegantly before saying, "It's a simple request this time." As she spoke, she motioned with her eyes for Zio and Fours to open the leather satchel on Susie. Zio, who had always been known for her proactiveness, immediately took 2 steps forward and bent down to reach out with her hand. During this short period of time, she had originally wanted to pat Susie's head to show that she meant no harm. But just as she extended her right palm, Susie had already turned her head, turning her body half around, placing the small leather satchel in front of her. "I'm usually popular with animals. For example, mosquitoes." Zio kept her expression unchanged as she unzipped the satchel and took out a stack of papers from Susie's leather pouch. She stood up and took a look at the stack of papers. She saw that it depicted a young man with ordinary looks, but his neatly combed hair, round glasses, and mocking brown eyes all looked very familiar to her. I must have seen him somewhere. Zio looked down and saw the corresponding description. Formerly used name, Lainvis, wanted swindler. I know where I've seen him before. Zio was suddenly enlightened and almost made an inelegant gesture of slapping her forehead. Before she met Audrey, one of the main sources of her income was flipping through newspapers, researching wanted posters, and using her connections in many gangs in Eastborough to seek out criminals who were worth fat bounties. I had thought of finding this Lainvis, who has a bounty of £100. Besides, he swept away more than £10,000 in cash. However, I've recently been too busy with Miss Audrey's requests and had forgotten about this matter. Zio and Fours looked at each other and then asked frankly, "How much is this request worth? How much is the request worth?" Audrey was startled for a moment. She had completely forgotten the matter of payment, as from her point of view it was a test from Mr. Fool. When were examinees ever given money? £100. Audrey deliberated and gave a number. "Deal," Zio and Fours answered in unison. "If we can catch him, not only would we receive £100 from Miss Audrey, but we can also obtain an equal amount from the bounty." "What a great mission," Zio asked casually, her eyes shining. "Why are you looking for this swindler? Did he swindle you of your money?" "I don't even know who he is. It's really a simple request. £100 was enough to complete the deal. There's no need to tell Mr. Fool about this. It's only £100. Audrey, with a polite smile, ignored Zio's question and instead mentioned, "I received word that he's in Backlund." "Ah, yes, there are a dozen or so portraits here, different portraits. I took into account that Lainvis must have disguised himself, so I'm giving you pictures of him without glasses, with a beard, with a change of hairstyle. Pictures based on conjectures. I'm also very good at drawing and painting." Audrey tilted her chin. Zio immediately forgot her previous question and said in pleasant surprise, "This is really good news." She felt as though she could already see the bounty of £200 beckoning at her. The mysterious person she had met at Mr. A's gathering had yet to establish contact with her. Therefore, all she could do was continue with her business of earning money. Audrey nodded indiscernibly. She muttered, "Do you have any leads on the matter regarding the psychology alchemists?" Fours adjusted her long, curly hair, looked at Viscount Glaint, who was listening to the side, and said, "I recently joined a new Beyonder gathering. Rumor has it that the Spectator and Telepathist potion formulas have previously appeared there. I'm suspecting that one of the members from the gathering is from the psychology alchemists. I'll apply to bring you with me the next gathering." "All right." Audrey deliberately didn't hide her joy. She had read their true state of mind from the colors, body language, and the subtle expressions of Zio and Fours to judge their enthusiasm for the mission. They didn't lie regarding the psychology alchemists either. Viscount Glaint mumbled, "Audrey's matter seems to be on the brink of success." "Where's my formula, Audrey?" "There are really no clues as of yet. The apothecary pathway is mostly in the south, where the Phaenopotter kingdom is." Fours gestured with deep regret. "All right, I'm still young. I'm only in my early 20s. I still have time to wait." Glaint replied in a humorous tone. "All right, thank you for your help. See you again next time." Audrey bowed gracefully, wore her gloves, and mounted her horse as she rode down the track. Susie happily followed, as if she had found new entertainment, as he spent the night experimenting. It was already 9:34 of a Tuesday morning by the time Klein woke up. Biting into a piece of bread slathered with butter, he wore his coat and hat, hurried out the door, and wrote on the message book hanging by the doorbell's pull rope. "Owner is out and will be back after 5 in the afternoon." Actually, he didn't have much to do. It was purely to guard against a sudden visit from Millet Carter. If the other party found out that the detective he hired for a full £50 wasn't out and about, searching for information or organizing people to confirm the layout of the structure, and was instead at home leisurely drinking tea and reading novels, he would surely revoke the commission and not pay the last £40. I really have nothing to do but wait for Miss Justice's information. Klein stood at the end of the street and looked at the haze in the sky, while helplessly muttering to himself. He had already decided last night where he would spend the day. In the morning, I'll practice shooting at the Kellogg Club, read the newspapers, enjoy a free lunch, take a nap in the afternoon, exercise through playing sports like squash. Once the Bravehearts bar opens, I'll take a carriage there and see if I can learn about more Beyonder gatherings from Kaspar's. Klein had no intention of looking for Marek. Although he was certain that he had more than one circle of Beyonders, he was afraid that Miss Bodyguard would also belong to those circles. It wouldn't be convenient for him to sell potion formulas, as it would arouse a high degree of suspicion. Since the true Creator has given you the ability to divine and a strong body, would he still grant you potion formulas that you do not need? It's impossible just thinking about it. Klein filled in the details with his imagination as he boarded the public carriage that headed for Hillston Borough. Half an hour later, he entered the Kellogg Club and saw an acquaintance. It was Talem Dumont, the equestrian teacher who had recommended him to the club. He was Mary Gale's friend. Dressed in a black tweed overcoat, the brown-haired Talem walked over. He sized up Klein and said with an odd smile, "Good morning. Mary and Doragu are getting a divorce. Are you suspecting the reason why I joined the club?" Relying on the clown's ability, Klein easily made a surprised expression. "Really? That is really surprising." Talem gave him a deeply suspicious look and suddenly laughed. "I have a friend who's been troubled about something recently. I want to know how good your marksmanship and fighting skills are." "Commission. He only asked about my marksmanship and fighting skills, not reasoning. This is a request involving violence." Klein smiled and said, "I was planning on heading to the shooting range. You can take a look, but fighting requires an opponent to be able to see my standard." "I've learned how to fight before," Talem eagerly replied. Chapter 270, Reporter, bang, bang, bang. Holding onto a revolver that he rented from the Kellogg Club with one hand, Klein pulled the trigger repeatedly, hitting the bullseye accurately, with the worst shot hitting the 8 ring. By feeding his practice with live bullets, along with the superhuman control that he had after becoming a clown, his marksmanship was considered rather excellent. If I continue practicing for a few months, I could even be considered a sharpshooter. Klein unloaded the revolver in satisfaction and cleared the empty shells. They fell to the ground noisily as he looked at Talem Dumont with a smile. "Are you satisfied? Very good." The equestrian teacher, Talem, had already taken off his black tweed overcoat and light gray sweater and adopted a boxing stance. "Come on, let me see the standard of your fighting skills." "I can tell you frankly that I've received training as a trainee knight since I was young, and I've never let it go to waste. As a Beyonder, if I can't even beat an ordinary man who has only received training, then I might as well die." Klein cursed silently. Without taking off his double-breasted coat, he set down his revolver. Klein took 2 side steps and gestured to Talem that he could begin. He originally wanted to wriggle his finger to add to the atmosphere, but when he thought of the other party's strength, he couldn't be bothered to waste his time. Talem appeared to be a little excited as he began bounce-stepping a little. He suddenly pressed forward and threw out a punch to the right. Klein blocked and grabbed with his left hand, bent low and twisted his waist before reaching out his right palm and did a smooth backflip. Thud. Talum flew out, landing on his back. Klein didn't exert any strength towards the end, only throwing him off his feet through the use of inertia. Impressive? Talum quickly stood up and gave a thumbs up. As expected of a famous detective, your marksmanship and fighting skills are excellent. I only beat a weak chicken like you, so how can you tell that my fighting skills are very high? Klein secretly lampooned and asked with a smile. Now that you have a better picture, can you tell me what kind of request your friend has? Heh, he will come to the club later. You can talk amongst yourselves. Talum massaged his back as he said, As for what the request exactly entails, I'm not sure either. Oh right, he's a reporter at the Daily Observer, Mike Joseph. He's probably hoping for some short-term protection. All right. Klein didn't ask any more questions. He continued practicing his shooting, but he didn't limit himself to a revolver. He also practiced with a hunting rifle, a single-shot rifle, and a repeating rifle. He hoped that if he encountered any problems in the future, he would be able to use any of the firearms around him. Shortly before 12 noon, he returned to the first floor, went into the buffet cafeteria, and got a serving of roast chicken and a piece of pan-fried steak, as well as the club's limited supply of cream cheese lobster after placing his meal down. Klein got some Potter seafood rice, fruit salad, oyster broth, and marquis black tea. Facing this sumptuous lunch, he couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva as he praised the goddess in his heart. If this was eaten outside, it would probably cost 3 soldi. Klein switched between using silver knives, forks, and spoons as he ate in contentment. When he was almost done with the food on the table, Talum Dumont led a man in a heavy overcoat and a half-top hat over. Detective Moriarty, this is the friend I was talking about, Mike Joseph. Mike, this is the famous detective, Mr. Sherlock Moriarty. Talum smiled and introduced them. Nice to meet you. Mike took off his hat and bowed. He looked to be in his late 20s, with rather sparse eyebrows and rough skin. His pores were unusually prominent. However, his facial features weren't bad. His blue eyes were especially charming. The 2 thin lines from the meager mustache gave him a somewhat mature charm. Klein couldn't help but stroke the stubble that had become thicker around his lips. He got up and invited the other party to sit down, then he smiled and said, Today's cream cheese lobster is pretty good. You can give it a try. All right. Mike Joseph didn't refuse. He took a plate, made a circle, and picked up a lot of food. He came in a hurry, so he hasn't had lunch yet. Talum smiled as he explained for his friend and placed a stack of newspapers on the table. I can tell. Klein set down his knife and fork, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and sipped his black tea leisurely. He was very satisfied with the meal. At that moment, Mike Joseph came back with 2 plates of food. He took a few quick bites to fill his stomach before looking up at Klein. Detective Moriarty, have you heard about the recent serial murders? The ones which had organs removed? Klein's heart skipped a beat as he asked. Talum nodded and said wistfully, As expected, every detective is paying attention to this serial killer. Mike pulled out one of the papers and pushed it to Klein. This is the latest story. Klein took it and discovered that it was the Daily Observer where Mike worked at. On the front page were the words, 11. Another lady killed. Civilhouse Yard is helpless. The headquarters of the Backland Police Department was located at Civilhouse Street at the edge of Empress Borough, so they were also known as Civilhouse Yard. 11. It's already the 11th case. Klein resisted the urge to frown and continued reading. He found that it was indeed the same as the case he had previously encountered. The victim was a woman dressed in a gorgeous long skirt and had her intestines removed from her stomach. This is clearly a case with signs of devil worship all over it. The Civilhouse Yard must have handed the case to the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, or the machinery hive mind squads. They have people capable of divination, mediumship, and all sorts of magical and effective Beyonder methods. How is it that the case hasn't been cracked? Why isn't the criminal arrested yet? Does the criminal have rich anti-investigation powers and is able to destroy the souls of the deceased? Or could it be that the deceased soul, along with her innards, were extracted to fulfill the requirements of the devil worship ritual? Yes, He's definitely capable of interfering with divination. Indeed, if the Devil Pathway Beyonders lack such powers, how could they dare commit serial murders? Klein thought as he said to Mike Joseph, "You want to do a private investigation? I'm sorry, I can't take this case. Without the invitation of the police, I cannot take it. I have to maintain a good relationship with them." The so-called good relationship is the kind where they invite me to the police station for coffee. Klein did some self-critical lampooning. The real reason for his refusal was that it was easy to run into official Beyonders involved in the investigation of the serial killings, perhaps including the Backlund Diocese's Nighthawks. No, not an investigation. No, the precise description is that it's not an investigation to seek the murderer. I just want to finish my report. Mike Joseph swallowed some shrimp and explained. Report? Klein put down his white enamel cup, crossed his hands, and leisurely asked Mike Joseph. Mike Joseph said, "If you buy the Daily Observer tomorrow or the day after, you'll see my in-depth coverage on the serial killings. The most important part is my reveal of what the victims have in common so as to alert people who fall into this group." "Oh, what do they have in common?" Klein asked curiously. Mike took a sip of his coffee and said, "Besides being a woman and wearing a colorful dress, there's one other important thing they have in common. I did a thorough investigation of the victim's career and found an interesting tidbit. Some of them are maids, others textile workers, tailors, and even teachers. On the surface, there doesn't seem to be any overlap, but in reality, they've all been street girls." "Street girl? A teacher?" Klein asked in surprise. In the Lone Kingdom, teachers were part of the middle class and received at least £2 a week. That was enough to make a woman lead quite a good life, so there was no need for her to be a street girl. The corner of Mike's mouth twitched as he sighed and said, "Yes, in the past. They may have had very difficult times before they found a job that could support them. I've done a survey before. In Backlund, 1 in 6 women aged 15 to 55 is or has been a street girl. Heh, this is our country. Foreigners who come here are surprised that a very conservative country, a bustling metropolis, would actually be filled with street girls. This number is a little exaggerated. If it were true, it could only be said that reality can be more exaggerated than fiction. This damned world." Klein was speechless. After some thought, he said deliberately, "One question, how does the murderer know that the victim had been a street girl? They don't have labels on them, and even you needed a thorough investigation to discover this." "As expected of a great detective, this might be the clue," Mike Joseph answered without feeling surprised. "No, if it was a Beyonder from the Devil Path, then the standard he would choose from would be someone who appears to have sunken low but didn't actually degenerate completely. Furthermore, they should have a keen intuition towards degeneration, and they might be able to see the corresponding color that runs deep. With the colorful dress as a trigger, the target will basically be locked onto." Klein answered himself and asked, "So what else do you wish to investigate?" Mike nodded and said, "From these 11 cases, 10 of the ladies were once street girls except one. She's still a prostitute at present. Yes, she's the youngest 16-year-old cyber. This makes it very, very odd. I wish to visit Golden Rose, which is her, the place where she works for further investigation. I want to see if I can discover anything. I'm worried that my questions will anger the people there, so I plan to ask you to protect me temporarily. You don't need to teach them a lesson, and you just need to protect me at the most critical juncture and allow my escape. If nothing happens, I'll pay you £1, and if there's a fight, it'll be raised to £5. What do you think?" Klein laughed and replied, "Let me wash my hands before replying you." He bowed politely and sauntered over to the bathroom where he tossed a coin and obtained a positive answer. "This is the late Victoria era, a statistic in London.